in the annals of modern military history. There are a few moments that capture the world's attention, like a precision strike by U.S. Special Forces. These are not random acts of war, nor are they brute force assaults. They are carefully crafted, months-in-the-making operations that rely on secrecy, coordination, elite talent, and a willingness to embrace calculated risk. The recent raid that resulted in the capture of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro is one such momentum masterclass in surgical warfare, executed with overwhelming speed, pinpoint precision, and unwavering focus. It is an operation that, when examined closely, echoes the legendary mission that took down the world's most wanted terrorist, Osama bin Laden, over a decade earlier. Separated by more than 10 years, 2 continents, and vastly different geopolitical contexts. These 2 missions share a common thread. They reveal the unrivaled capability of America's elite warriors to strike deep into hostile territory, achieve the impossible, and vanish before the enemy can even comprehend what has happened. For audiences in the United States and Europe, these operations are more than just military successes. They are testaments to the power of planning, the courage of soldiers, and the resolve of a nation to defend its interests and bring justice to those who threaten it. To truly appreciate their brilliance, we must dive deep into both missions, from the quiet build-up and intelligence gathering to the heart-pounding execution and the far-reaching aftermath, uncovering the hidden details, the unsung heroes, and the split-second decisions that turned impossible odds into historic victories. The operation to capture Nicolas Maduro did not begin on the night of the raid. It began months earlier, in the quiet halls of the Pentagon, the CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia, and the Situation Room of the White House. For years, the United States had accused Maduro of leading a corrupt regime of overseeing state, sponsored narcoterrorism, that flooded American and European streets with illegal drugs, and of violating the human rights of his own people. Diplomatic efforts had failed, sanctions had proven ineffective, and it became clear that a more direct approach was necessary. But capturing a sitting head of state, especially one who had spent years fortifying his security and surrounding himself with loyalist forces, was no easy task. It required a level of planning and precision that only America's most elite special forces could provide. At the center of this plan was the Army's 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta, commonly known as Delta Force, a unit so secretive that the U.S. government did not officially acknowledge its existence until the 1980s. Delta Force is America Esitira Maset, a group of fewer than 1,000 operators handpicked from the best of the U.S. military. These are not just soldiers. They are athletes, strategists, linguists, and survival experts, each trained to operate in the most hostile environments on Earth, often alone or in small teams, with minimal support and zero room for error. To understand Delta Force's role in the Maduro raid, one must first understand the rigorous training that turns ordinary soldiers into Delta operators. The selection process alone is one of the most grueling in the world, with a dropout rate of over 90%. Candidates undergo weeks of physical and mental torture, long-distance runs with heavy rucksacks in extreme heat, sleep deprivation that pushes the limits of human endurance, and psychological tests designed to break even the strongest wills. Those who survive selection move on to a 6-month training course that covers everything from close quarters Beto CQB and hostage rescue to sabotage, surveillance, and hand-to-hand combat. They learn to use every weapon in the U.S. military arsenal, many that are not, from sniper rifles and machine guns to explosive devices and hand-to-hand combat techniques that can disable an enemy in seconds. They also undergo extensive training in urban warfare, a critical skill for the Maduro raid, which would take place in the heart of Caracas, Venezuela's densely populated capital city. Unlike conventional warfare, urban warfare is chaotic, unpredictable, and deadly. Every street corner, every window, and every doorway could hide an enemy. Delta operators are trained to navigate this chaos with calm precision, to prioritize speed and violence of action, and to protect innocent civilians while completing their mission. It is this training that would make the difference on the night of Maduro's capture. But Delta Force did not act alone. No elite operation ever does. Much like how SEAL Team 6 relied on specialized aviation support during the Bin Laden raid, Delta Force's ground assault was backed by one of the most skilled aviation units in the world, the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, known as the Night Stalkers. The Night Stalkers are to aviation what Delta Force is to ground combat elite, secretive and unrivaled in their capabilities. Founded in the wake of the failed 1980 Iran hostage rescue mission, The Night Stalkers were created to provide specialized aviation support to U.S. Special Forces, with a focus on inserting and extracting teams in hostile territory under the cover of darkness. Their pilots are among the best in the world, each with thousands of hours of flight time and extensive training in low-level, nighttime flying. They are trained to fly at speeds of over 200 miles per hour, just feet above the ground or water, using advanced night vision goggles, NVGs, and terrain-following radar to avoid detection. For the Maduro mission, the Night Stalkers would be flying highly modified aircraft planes and helicopters that had been stripped down, reinforced, and equipped with the latest stealth technology to avoid radar detection and enemy fire. The aircraft used in the Maduro raid were not standard military helicopters. They were precision tools modified specifically for the mission. The primary transport aircraft were MH-47G, Chinook's heavy-lift helicopters that had been upgraded with powerful engines, advanced avionics, and stealth features to reduce their noise signature and radar crossing. These massive helicopters, often referred to as the workhorses of special operations, are capable of carrying up to 55 fully equipped soldiers, along with heavy weapons and supplies. For the Maduro raid, each Chinook carried a 12-man Delta Force assault team, along with their gear, weapons, and explosives. Escorting the Chinooks were MH-60 Blackhawks, specifically the direct-action penetrator DAP variant helicopters transformed into flying tanks, armed with M134 miniguns which can fire up to 6,000 rounds per minute, 7.62mm machine guns, and Hydra 70 rockets. These Blackhawks were tasked with providing close air support to the Delta operators, shielding the larger Chinooks from enemy fire and eliminating any ground resistance that threatened the mission. Every detail of these aircraft had been carefully considered. Their paint schemes were designed to blend in with the night sky. Their engines were modified to run quieter, and their navigation systems were calibrated to ensure pinpoint accuracy even in complete darkness. The entire force package was further supported by the massive naval presence of the USS Gerald R. Ford Carrier Strike Group, the most advanced aircraft carrier in the world. Positioned in the Caribbean Sea for months before the raid, the Ford and its accompanying ships, including destroyers, cruisers, and submarines, served critical purposes. First, to enforce a naval blockade of Venezuela, preventing Maduro from fleeing the country by sea or receiving support from foreign allies. And second, to monitor Venezuelan airspace, using advanced radar systems to track every aircraft that took off or landed, ensuring that the Night Stalkers helicopters could approach undetected. The Ford also carried dozens of fighter jets, including F-35 Lightning II stealth fighters and F-A-18 Super Hornets, which were on standby to provide air support if the mission went wrong. This show of force was not just a deterrent. It was a critical part of the mission's planning, ensuring that the Venezuelan military would be hesitant to respond aggressively for fear of triggering a full-scale U.S. military response. It was a tactic that mirrored the U.S. military's quiet build-up in Afghanistan and Pakistan ahead of the Bin Laden raid, where naval and air forces were positioned strategically to support the ground operation and provide a quick escape route for the assault team. But the true foundation of success for both the Maduro and Bin Laden missions was laid long before the first boot hit the ground. For the Maduro raid, this meant months of intelligence gathering, surveillance, and psychological warfare. The CIA, working with local sources inside Venezuela, spent weeks mapping Maduro's movements, learning his daily routine, and identifying the location of his primary residence, a heavily guarded compound in the upscale neighborhood of La Carla, just outside downtown Caracas. Agents used drones to capture high-resolution images of the compound, mapping every wall, every window, every guard post, and every possible escape route. They also intercepted communications between Maduro's security detail, learning their shift patterns, their tactics, and their weaknesses. This intelligence was critical. It allowed planners to identify the best time to strike, the most vulnerable points in the compound's defenses, and the safest route for the assault team to enter and exit. In addition to surveillance, the U.S. military also launched a campaign of electronic warfare to blind and confuse the Venezuelan military. 4 weeks before the raid, U.S. electronic warfare aircraft, specifically EA-1HE Growlers, deployed from the USS Gerald R. Ford, flew covert missions off the coast of Venezuela, jamming the country's radar and communications networks. The Growler is a specialized aircraft designed to disrupt enemy electronics, using high-powered jammers to disable radar systems, cell phone networks, and radio communications. This meant that when the Night Stalkers helicopters approached Venezuela's coast, the country's radar operators would see nothing but static, When Maduro's security detail tried to call for backup, their radios would go silent. It was a form of modern-day blinding that left the Venezuelan military defenseless, unable to detect the incoming assault or coordinate a response. This electronic silence would soon turn into kinetic chaos, carefully orchestrated distraction that would pave the way for Delta Force to reach their target. At exactly 2 a.m. local time, the operation kicked off with a series of massive, coordinated diversionary strikes. Explosions rocked key military sites across Caracas, specifically targeting the La Carlota military airbase and the Forte Yuna military complex, two of the most important military installations in the country. These strikes were not random. They were calculated to create panic and confusion within Venezuela's military high command. By hitting the airbase and the military headquarters simultaneously, U.S. forces forced the Venezuelan military to focus its attention and rapid reaction forces on defending these high-profile locations. The strikes were carried out by U.S. fighter jets and cruise missiles deployed from the USS Gerald R. Ford and were designed to look like a full-scale attack on Venezuela's military infrastructure. The goal was simple: to pull as many Venezuelan troops away from Maduro's residence as possible, leaving it vulnerable and exposed. It was a tactic straight out of the Operation Neptune Spear playbook, the same strategy used to distract Pakistani forces ahead of the Bin Laden raid, where U.S. aircraft conducted diversionary flights near the border to draw attention away from As the diversionary strikes continued to rage across Caracas, the Night Stalker's helicopters began their final approach. Flying at treetop level just 50 feet above the ground to avoid any remaining radar detection, the MH-47G Chinooks and MH-60 Blackhawks pierced the Venezuelan coast, their engines humming quietly in the night. The pilots, wearing advanced night vision goggles, navigated the complex terrain of Venezuela's coastal mountains, using terrain-filing radar to avoid obstacles and stay on course. The Blackhawks, flying ahead of the Chinooks, scanned the area for any signs of enemy resistance, their miniguns and rockets ready to fire at a moment's notice. Inside the Chinooks, the Delta Force operators sat in silence, their faces painted black, their weapons loaded, their minds focused on the mission ahead. Each operator knew their role. Each knew that one mistake could cost them their lives or the lives of their teammates. They had trained for this moment for months, running through countless simulations of the raid, practicing every entry, every movement, every shot. Now, as the helicopters approached Maduro's residence, the time for training was over. The time for action had begun. Maduro's residence was a heavily guarded compound, surrounded by 12-foot-high concrete walls topped with barbed wire and surveillance cameras. Inside the walls, dozens of Maduro's personal security, detail handpicked loyalists, trained by foreign mercenaries, patrol the grounds, carrying assault rifles and wearing body armor. The residence itself was a large two-story mansion with bulletproof windows, reinforced doors, and a network of tunnels that Maduro could use to escape in an emergency. But thanks to months of surveillance and intelligence gathering, the Delta operators knew every detail of the compound's defenses. They knew where the guard posts were located when the shifts changed, and even where the surveillance cameras had blind spots. As the Night Stalker's helicopters hovered over the compound, their rotor, noise masked by the chaos of the ongoing explosions across the city, the Delta operators prepared to rappel to the ground. In a matter of seconds, ropes were deployed from the Chinooks, and the Delta operators began their descent. Moving quickly but quietly, they landed on the roof of the mansion and the surrounding grounds, their boots hitting the concrete with barely a sound. Using specialized tools, they breached the compound's walls and windows, moving in teams of 4 to clear each room. The assault was executed with textbook precision. Delta operators used hand signals to communicate, moving from room to room, checking corners, and neutralizing any guards who stood in their way. The firefight was intense but brief. Delta operators are trained for close-quarters battle, a method of fighting inside buildings that prioritizes speed and violence of action to neutralize threats before they can react. Guards who tried to resist were quickly taken down, their weapons seized, and their radios disabled to prevent them from calling for backup. The operators moved with a fluidity that comes only from years of training. Their movements synchronize, their focus unwavering. Crucially, the mission mandate was to capture Maduro, not kill him. The United States intended to bring him to face trial in a U.S. court on charges of narco-terrorism, corruption, and human rights violations, charges that had been filed years earlier but had never been enforced. This meant that the Delta operators had to secure Maduro alive amidst the gunfire, a task that added an extra layer of complexity to the mission. Killing him would have been easier, but capturing him required restraint, precision, and a willingness to take risks. As the operators cleared the mansion, they searched each room, looking for Maduro and his wife, Celia Flores. She was quickly detained, her hands cuffed and her mouth gagged to prevent her from screaming. He did not resist. He knew that resistance was futile. The operators quickly cuffed him, searched him for weapons, and verified his identity using facial recognition technology, another tool that had been used extensively in the intelligence gathering phase of the mission. Once Maduro and Flores were positively identified and detained, the operation immediately shifted to the extraction phase. There was no time to linger. The Venezuelan military would soon realize that the diversionary strikes were a distraction, and they would send troops to Maduro's residence to investigate. The Delta operators and their high-value prisoners boarded the waiting ship, their gear quickly stowed, their weapons still at the ready. The Night Stalker's pilots wasted no time, lifting off from the compound just minutes after the operators had boarded. The entire ground phase of the operation had lasted only 12 minutes of intense action that had changed the course of Venezuelan history. By the time the Venezuelan military realized what had happened, or scrambled jets to intercept, the U.S. helicopters had already cleared the city limits, flying at high speed toward the Caribbean Sea, where the USS Gerald R. Ford was waiting to receive them. The speed of the withdrawal was absolute. It was a masterful escape, executed with the same precision as the assault itself. As the Chinooks flew toward the Ford, Maduro sat in silence, his head bowed, his hands cuffed behind his back. He had once been one of the most powerful men in Latin America, a leader who had defied the United States for years, who had accused America of imperialism and aggression. Now, he was a prisoner, being flown to face justice in the country he had so often criticized. For the Delta operators and Night Stalkers on board the helicopters, there was no celebration, no cheering, no high. They were professionals focused on the task at hand, ensuring that their prisoners arrived safely, and that they themselves returned home alive. It was a mindset that mirrored the SEAL Team 6 operators who had captured and killed Osama bin Laden over a decade earlier, a mindset of quiet professionalism, of duty above all else. To understand the full significance of the Maduro raid, we must turn back the clock to May 2011, to another historic mission that defined U.S. Special Operations. Operation Neptune, Spear, the raid that killed Osama bin Laden for almost 10 years. The United States had been tirelessly searching for bin Laden, the terrorist mastermind behind the September 11, 2001 attacks that killed almost 3,000 Americans, destroyed the World Trade Center in New York City, damaged the Pentagon, and triggered a global war on terror that was still raging at the time of Maduro's capture. After the 9/11 attacks, U.S. forces had quickly toppled the Taliban regime in Afghanistan, which had been sheltering bin Laden, but bin Laden himself had escaped, vanishing into the mountains of Afghanistan and Pakistan. For years, he had remained at large, a symbol of defiance, a reminder that the United States had not yet achieved justice for the victims of 9/11, involving thousands of soldiers, intelligence agents, and analysts. It was a hunt that tested the limits of U.S. intelligence and military capabilities, a hunt that many believed would never end in success. When CIA analysts identified a man named Abu Ahmed al-Kuwaiti, bin Laden's most trusted courier, al-Kuwaiti had been on the CIA's radar for years. But it was not until 2010 that analysts were able to track him to a compound in about Pakistan, a city located just 35 miles from Islamabad, the country's capital. The compound was unlike any other in the area. It was surrounded by 18-foot-high concrete walls topped with barbed wire. It had no phone lines or internet access, and the residents never left the premises. It was a fortress, designed to keep people out and to keep someone in. CIA drones began flying covert surveillance missions over the compound, capturing high-resolution images of the buildings and the people inside. Over the course of several months, analysts studied these images, mapping the compound's layout, identifying the residents, and trying to determine if bin Laden was indeed hiding there. They learned that the compound had 3 buildings, a large main house, a smaller guest house, and a storage shed. They also noticed that a tall, bearded man who matched bin Laden's physical description was often seen walking around the compound's courtyard, but he was never seen leaving the premises. There was no direct evidence that this man was bin Laden. No one had captured a clear image of his face, and no one had intercepted communications from him. But the circumstantial evidence was overwhelming. The compound's secrecy, its its location, and the presence of al-Qaeda all pointed to one conclusion: Osama bin Laden was inside. Once the CIA had identified the compound as bin Laden's likely hideout, the next step was to plan the operation to capture or kill him. This was no easy task. Abbottabad was a heavily populated city, and the compound was located in a residential neighborhood surrounded by homes and schools. Any operation would have to be executed with extreme precision to avoid civilian casualties. Additionally, Pakistan was a U.S. ally in name only. While the Pakistani government had publicly supported the war on terror, many elements within the Pakistani military and intelligence services were sympathetic to bin Laden and al-Qaeda. This meant that the United States could not trust the Pakistani government with the operation. If Warji leaked, bin Laden would escape, and the mission would be a failure. As a result, planners decided that the operation would be carried out entirely by U.S. Special Forces. With no Pakistani involvement, it was a risky decision. Operating on foreign soil without the host country's permission is a violation of international law, but it was a risk that President Obama and his national security team were willing to take. The unit chosen to carry out the operation was SEAL Team 6. Officially known as the Naval Special Warfare Development Group, DEVGRU, the U.S. Navy's Tier 1 Special Forces unit, and one of the most elite fighting forces in the world. Like Delta Force, SEAL Team 6 operators are handpicked from the best Navy SEALs, and they undergo some of the most rigorous training in the military. Their training includes everything from underwater combat and parachuting to close quarters battle and hostage rescue. They are also trained to operate in a variety of jungles, mountains, and urban areas and to speak multiple languages. For the bin Laden raid, SEAL Team 6 operators spent months training for the mission, running through countless simulations of the raid, practicing every entry, every movement, and every shot. They built a full-scale replica of the Abbottabad compound in North Carolina, using the CIA's surveillance images to ensure that every detail was accurate, from the height of the walls to the layout of the rooms. They practiced rappelling from helicopters onto the compound's roof, breaching doors with explosives, and clearing rooms in teams. They also practiced extracting from the compound quickly, in case the mission went wrong and they needed to escape before Pakistani forces arrived. Like the Maduro raid, the bin Laden mission relied heavily on specialized aviation support from the Night Stalkers. The Night Stalkers were tasked with inserting the SEAL Team 6 operators into the compound, providing close air support during the raid, and extracting the team after the mission was complete. For the operation, the Night Stalkers used a modified MH-60 Black Hawk helicopters that had been equipped with stealth technology to reduce their noise signature and radar cross-section. These helicopters were designed to fly quietly, allowing them to approach the compound undetected. Additionally, the pilots were trained to fly at low altitude, using the cover of night and the surrounding terrain to avoid detection by Pakistani radar. The operation also included a third helicopter, a CH-47 Chinook, which was positioned as a backup. In case one of the Blackhawks crashed or was disabled during the mission, this backup plan would prove to be critical. On April 29, 2011, President Obama was briefed on the final details of the operation. Many within his national security team were skeptical about the mission. After all, if it went wrong, top U.S. troops would either be killed or remain trapped behind enemy lines. Not only would this be a disastrous loss of life, but it would potentially expose many of the US's biggest secrets if the operators were captured and interrogated. Additionally, there was still doubt about whether bin Laden was actually in the compound. The evidence was circumstantial, and there was a chance that the operation would be a costly failure. But President Obama, after careful consideration, made the decision to move forward with the mission. He later recalled that moment, saying, "I knew that if we didn't act, and bin Laden was indeed there, we would regret it for the rest of our lives. And if we did act, and it went wrong, I'd be responsible for the lives of those brave men." It was a decision that would define his presidency, a decision that required courage, resolve, and a willingness to embrace risk. At 3:30 a.m. local time on May 1st, 2011, the two modified Black Hawk helicopters carrying 24 SEAL Team 6 operators, a dog handler, an interpreter, and a Belgian Malinois named Cairo, trained to detect explosives and alert the team to enemy activity, took off from a U.S. military base in Afghanistan. The flight to Abbottabad took approximately 90 minutes, with the helicopters flying at low altitude to avoid detection. As they approached the compound, the pilots reduced their speed, flying quietly over the residential neighborhood, their night vision goggles allowing them to navigate the dark streets below. The SEAL operators sat in silence, their minds focused on the mission ahead, their weapons loaded and ready. They knew that this was their moment, that after 10 years of searching, they were about to face the world's most wanted terrorist. As the helicopters hovered over the compound, the first Black Hawk began to lower its ropes, allowing the SEAL operators to rappel to the ground. But just as the first operators began their descent, disaster struck. The helicopter flew into what was known as a vortex ring state, a dangerous air phenomenon caused by higher than expected temperatures, which creates an air vortex that disrupts the helicopter's rotor blades. The rotor's air pressure did not diffuse properly, and the helicopter was knocked off balance. It grazed the back of the compound's wall, damaging its tail rotor, and began to roll over. The quick-thinking pilot, realizing that a crash was inevitable, drove the helicopter into the ground nose first, preventing a total collapse. Miraculously, all of the SEAL operators and crew on board escaped unscathed, but the crash had damaged the helicopter beyond repair, and the team was now without one of their primary extraction vehicles. Worse, there was a risk that the crash had alerted Pakistani forces to their presence, but the SEAL operators did not panic. They had trained for this scenario. Within seconds, they had exited the crashed helicopter and moved to secure the compound's perimeter. The second Black Hawk, which had landed safely outside the compound, deployed its team including the dog handler, interpreter, and coyote to reinforce the first team. Together, the SEAL operators scaled the compound's walls and began breaching the buildings. The first building they targeted was the guest house, where they suspected Al-Kuwaiti and his family were staying. Using portable explosives, they blew open the front door and rushed inside, moving quickly to clear each room. Inside, they found Al-Kuwaiti, his brother, and his wife. According to some reports, Al-Kuwaiti was armed and fired on the SEALs, who returned fire and killed him. Other reports suggested the SEALs were able to surprise Al-Kuwaiti after cutting power to the compound, eliminating him without a fight. Regardless of the details, Al-Kuwaiti was dead, a critical blow to Bin Laden's security network. From the guest house, the SEAL operators moved to the main house, where they believed Bin Laden was hiding. The main house was 3 stories tall, with the 3rd floor being the most heavily guarded. As the operators ascended the stairs, they encountered more resistance. Bin Laden's bodyguards, who had been awakened by the commotion, fought back fiercely. The SEALs, trained for close-quarters battle, quickly neutralized these threats, moving from room to room, checking corners, and ensuring that no one was left alive who could pose a danger. On the 2nd floor, they found several of Bin Laden's children and grandchildren, who were quickly detained and moved to a safe area of the compound. This was a difficult moment for the SEAL operators. They were there to kill a terrorist, but they were also committed to protecting innocent civilians, even the family members of their target. It was a reminder that war is never black and white, that even the most justified missions involve difficult moral choices. As the SEALs ascended to the 3rd floor, their hearts raced. This was the moment they had trained for, the moment that would determine whether the 10-year manhunt had been worth it. The 3rd floor's main room was dark, the power still cut off. As the operators entered the room, they saw a tall, bearded man standing in the doorway of a bedroom of Osama bin Laden. He was wearing a loose-fitting white tunic, the same outfit he had worn in his many propaganda videos, and he appeared to be unarmed. The SEAL operators did not hesitate. They immediately fired, wounding Bin Laden. But Bin Laden was able to retreat back into the bedroom, where several of his wives were hiding. The SEALs pursued him, moving quickly into the bedroom. One of Bin Laden's wives rushed toward the operators, seemingly trying to protect her husband. The SEALs quickly shot her in the leg, wounding her, and pushed past her to reach Bin Laden. What happened next is a matter of debate, with different SEAL operators giving slightly different accounts of the final moments. According to Matt Bissonette, known by his pen name Mark Owen, one of the SEALs on the mission, Bin Laden had been mortally wounded by the initial shots. As the operators approached him, he was lying on the ground, barely alive. His wives were trying to protect him, but the SEALs pushed them aside. When Bin Laden moved slightly, as if reaching for a weapon, the SEALs fired multiple shots, killing him instantly. According to another SEAL operator, Robert J. O'Neill, the moment was more dramatic. Bin Laden, though wounded, was still able to grab one of his wives and use her as a human shield. As Bin Laden pushed the woman toward the SEALs, O'Neill fired 2 shots directly into Bin Laden's forehead, killing him instantly. Regardless of the details, the outcome was the same: Osama bin Laden. The man responsible for the deaths of thousands of innocent people was dead. The SEAL team radioed back to the Situation Room in the White House, using the code word Geronimo, 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 Geronimo. Geronimo officially confirming that the enemy had been killed in action. The entire affair had taken less than 15 minutes from the moment the helicopters landed to the moment bin Laden was killed. It was one of the most efficient special operations missions in U.S. military history, completed without a single death or serious injury to the SEAL team. Back in the White House, President Obama and his national security team watched the mission unfold in real time via night vision images transmitted by a CIA drone flying over the compound. When they heard the code word Geronimo, there was a moment of silence, followed by quiet celebration. President Obama, visibly relieved, uttered the words that the entire nation had been waiting to hear. "We got him." It was a moment of closure, a moment that brought hope to a nation still healing from the wounds of 9/11. But the mission was not over yet. The SEAL operators quickly secured bin Laden's body, taking DNA samples to confirm his identity, and began searching the compound for intelligence. They found hundreds of documents, computers, hard drives, and cell phones treasured troves of information about al-Qaeda's operations, its leadership, and its future plans. This intelligence would prove to be invaluable in the ongoing war on terror, allowing the United States to disrupt al-Qaeda cells around the world and prevent future attacks. The SEALs also detained the remaining residents of the compound bin Laden's wives, children, and grandchildren, moved them to a safe area outside the compound, where they would be left for Pakistani forces to find. They had no desire to take these civilians into custody. Their mission was to kill bin Laden and gather intelligence, not to capture innocent people. The next step was to extract from the compound. The SEAL operators boarded the second Black Hawk and the backup Chinook, which had arrived shortly after the crash. But before they left, they had to deal with the crashed Black Hawk. The helicopter contained vital information about U.S. military capabilities, including its stealth technology and advanced avionics, and the SEALs could not allow it to fall into Pakistani hands. Using the same portable explosives they had used to breach the compound's doors, they destroyed the crashed helicopter, ensuring that no sensitive information would be recovered. The explosion was quick and powerful, reducing the helicopter to a pile of rubble. Within minutes, the SEALs were airborne, flying back to Afghanistan, their mission complete. The flight back to Afghanistan took over an hour and a half, more than 3 times the length of the mission itself. During the flight, the SEAL operators verified bin Laden's identity using DNA testing, comparing his DNA to samples taken from his family members who had been detained in the past. The results confirmed what they already knew. The man they had killed was indeed Osama bin Laden. When the helicopters landed at Bagram airfield in Afghanistan, the SEALs were greeted by U.S. military officials who congratulated them on their success. But the SEALs remained focused. They knew that their mission was not yet fully complete. There was still one more task to attend to: disposing of bin Laden's body. Disposing of bin Laden's body was a delicate matter. The United States wanted to ensure that bin Laden would not have a grave that could become a shrine for al-Qaeda supporters, a place where terrorists could gather to honor their leader. Additionally, cremation was against Islamic tradition, and the U.S. government wanted to respect bin Laden's faith, even though he was a hated terrorist. After consulting with Islamic scholars and the government of Saudi Arabia, bin Laden's home country, the United States decided to bury bin Laden at sea. This decision ensured that bin Laden would have no permanent resting place, that his body would be disposed of in a way that was consistent with Islamic tradition, and that al-Qaeda would not have a shrine to rally around. On the morning of May 2nd, 2011, bin Laden's body was loaded onto the USS Carl Vinson, an aircraft carrier deployed in the Arabian Sea. The body was washed and wrapped in a white shroud, in accordance with Islamic tradition, and a brief Islamic prayer was recited by a U.S. military chaplain. Then, the body was placed in a weighted bag, loaded with hundreds of pounds of iron chains, and placed on a wooden board. As the board was tilted forward, bin Laden's body slipped into the sea, disappearing beneath the waves. It was a quiet, solemn end to the life of one of the most evil men in history, a man who had caused so much pain and suffering, a man who had evaded justice for over a decade. With his burial at sea, the United States had finally closed the book on the 9/11 attacks, bringing justice to the victims and their families. The aftermath of both the Maduro and bin Laden missions was for sparking debate, celebration, and controversy around the world. In the United States and Europe, the bin Laden raid was celebrated as a major victory in the war on terror, a moment of justice for the victims of 9/11. Large crowds gathered outside the White House in New York City and in other cities across the country, cheering, waving American flags, and chanting USA, USA for many Americans. It was a moment of Closure. A reminder that the United States would never forget the attacks of 9/11 and would always seek justice for those who had been harmed. In Europe, the raid was also widely praised, with European leaders hailing it as a major step forward in the global fight against terrorism. It was a moment of unity, a reminder that the United States and Europe stood together in the fight against extremism. The Maduro raid, while more recent, has also sparked widespread debate. In the United States and Europe, many have praised the operation as a victory against corruption and narco, a step towards stabilizing Latin America and reducing the flow of illegal drugs into Western countries. Maduro's trial is expected to be a high-profile event, drawing attention from around the world, and many hope that it will send a message to other corrupt leaders that they cannot act with impunity. However, the raid has also been criticized by some who argue that capturing a sitting head of state without the permission of his government is a violation of international law, a form of U.S. imperialism that undermines the sovereignty of other nations. These criticisms are not unfounded. The United States has a long history of intervening in the affairs of other countries, and many nations view U.S. Special Forces raids as a threat to their independence. Despite these criticisms, however, there is no denying that the Maduro raid was a masterful display of U.S. Special Forces capabilities, a mission that achieved its objectives with minimal loss of life and maximum precision. Both missions also sparked conspiracy theories, which lingered in their wake. After the Bin Laden raid, some people claimed that Bin Laden was still alive, that the body that was buried at sea was a fake, and that the entire mission was a hoax designed to boost President Obama's approval ratings. These conspiracy theories were fueled by the fact that the U.S. government refused to release photos of Bin Laden's body, citing concerns that the photos would incite violence against U.S. troops and citizens, while the government eventually released some details about the mission, including DNA test results and accounts from SEAL operators. The conspiracy theories persisted. Similarly, after the Maduro raid, some people claimed that Maduro had not been captured at all, that the entire operation was a fabrication designed to distract from domestic problems in the United States. These conspiracy theories, while baseless, are a reminder of the distrust that many people around the world have for the U.S. government and its military operations. Another common thread between the two missions is the way in which they highlighted the importance of intelligence gathering for both the Maduro and Bin Laden raids. The key to success was not just the skill of the Special Forces operators, but the quality of the intelligence that was gathered in advance. Without months of surveillance, electronic warfare, and human intelligence, neither mission would have been possible. The CIA and other U.S. intelligence agencies played a critical role in both operations, using cutting-edge technology and skilled agents to gather the information needed to plan and execute the raids. This highlights a fundamental truth about modern warfare. In an age of advanced technology and asymmetric threats, intelligence is often more important than firepower. It is the intelligence that allows special forces to strike with precision, to avoid detection, and to achieve their objectives with minimal risk. Perhaps the most important legacy of both missions, however, is the courage and professionalism of the U.S. Special Forces operators who carried them out. Delta Force, SEAL Team 6, the Night Stalkers, these are men and women who put their lives on the line every day to protect their country and their fellow citizens. They have volunteers, people who have chosen to serve something greater than themselves, people who are willing to sacrifice their own safety and well-being for the sake of others. They train tirelessly, they prepare for every possible scenario, and they execute their missions with quiet professionalism and unwavering focus. They are the best of the best, and they are the reason why the United States has the most powerful and effective special forces in the world. From the streets of Caracas to the compound in Abu. These two missions are more than just military successes. They are testaments to the power of planning, precision, and the unbreakable spirit of America's elite warriors. They remind the world that the United States has the capability to strike anywhere, anytime, to defend its interests and bring justice to those who threaten it. They also remind us that war is never easy, that even the most justified missions involve risk, sacrifice, and difficult moral choices. But most importantly, they remind us that courage, dedication, and professionalism can overcome even the greatest odds. For audiences in the United States and Europe, these missions are a source of reminder of the strength and resolve of their nations, and of the men and women who defend them. They're also a reminder of the importance of standing together in the fight against corruption, terrorism, and injustice, in a world that is often divided by politics, religion, and ideology. The Maduro and Bin Laden raids are a testament to what can be achieved when nations work together, when elite forces are given the tools and support they need, and when people have the courage to do what is right. They are two masterclasses in special operations linked by strategy, defined by courage, and etched into the history of U.S. military excellence. And they will be remembered for generations to come as moments when the impossible became possible, when justice prevailed, and when the world saw the true power of America's elite warriors.